You have at the same time this nation state adoption starting to move forward, MicroStrategy trying to buy more. The ETFs are buying more. And I think MicroStrategy alone has taken off two times, or maybe close to three times the amount of supply that will be mined in all of 2025. So Omega candles are coming. I just can't see it not happening. I just don't see us hovering at 80, 90, 100. I think we'll see a very violent move to the upside, and then suddenly retail is going to be interested because now it's FOMO season, and retail seems to only really understand FOMO.
Samson Mow explains that the lack of barriers for institutional investment is already having an impact. Entities such as central banks and pension funds are now buying Bitcoin exposure through ETF and companies like MicroStrategy. The process is as simple as clicking a button on a brokerage platform, removing friction, and increasing the pace of adoption. Moreover, the endorsement from the U.S. government through Bitcoin-related initiatives is forcing other nations to reconsider their stance. Some governments that were previously hesitant are now accelerating their timelines for Bitcoin adoption.
Please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and the overall digital asset space, and drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks and enjoy the video.
Even before all this stuff is happening, I think the people that have been around for a while have always been bullish. Like, Bitcoin is just so transformational that it is hard to disregard it in any way whatsoever. And if you really understand it, I think you see the transformation potential, which is now coming to light and being more obvious to everyone else. But I guess right now, there are so many factors that right now you have I think the real beginnings of nation state adoption. So while El Salvador did become the first Bitcoin country, it is still very small relative to the US and many other countries. So I think the impact was not as profound because people are kind of writing it off. Like, okay, a small country is doing something. But with the US really going all in with the SBR, with the talk of their version of Bitcoin bonds, the Bit bonds, and with all the nation state mining, I think, like again, I talked about earlier, the calculus has completely changed. It's just a different equation completely now. So in my view, the ETFs were a critical unlock factor, and that was removing the blockage from TradFi money flowing into Bitcoin. Pre-ETF, you always had run-ups, and the run-ups would kind of fizzle out because the exchanges would be overloaded. They couldn't KYC and onboard fast enough. But with ETFs, there is no barrier now. The portal to TradFi capital is wide open. And you already see people taking advantage of that, like entities such as central banks and pension funds that are buying either ETFs or like MicroStrategy. So the exposure to Bitcoin is just a click now. It's like in your Robinhood trading account or whatever you want. So there is no barrier to capital inflow. Now, with the SBR, you have this sort of endorsement from the most powerful country on the planet so far. And that is really big. Like Hodl was saying, all these politicians, they're getting this dossier now saying, Bitcoin is going to be put into a reserve and they're going to buy more. And there are all these things happening. So they kind of have to take action. And we talked about it earlier. The career risk is just gone now. And it's actually inverted, that you have to have some sort of Bitcoin strategy, or else you're putting national security at risk. And I think that is starting to play out because some of the conversations that we've been having at Jan 3 have accelerated. We've had a lot of conversations and they're kind of slow. They're waiting for this signal to say it's okay, which is kind of unfortunate when you think about it, because the countries that need Bitcoin the most to kind of catch up or get out of debt, they are probably the least willing to do something. But now, I think with the US telegraphing intentions to do a lot of Bitcoin-related activities and accumulation, it's changed a lot. So some timetables have been moved up. Some conversations that we're talking about doing something in 2026 they moved it up a year. I think they'll keep moving it up as things progress. But the general sentiment is there is some feeling of urgency now, and I believe the intent to acquire 3 million some odd Bitcoin from Cynthia Lummis's Bitcoin Act, coupled with the BitBond proposal, it's probably not really felt or understood yet, but it will be felt and it will be understood. But 3 million Bitcoin is something like 14-15% of supply. If you factor in lost coins, it goes up to something like 19%, and that's just from one country. So there's just not enough Bitcoin to go around, and it's also a problem that countries don't yet understand, that there is a hard limit, because everyone's been living in fiat land for so long, where if you need money, it just materializes. If you make a mistake, you can undo your mistake by printing some more money to, patch it over. But there's just this absolute limit with Bitcoin that I don't think fully registers for normal people, retail investors, and for politicians and leaders of countries. But this is all going to reconcile, and it's going to reconcile very quickly. And you have, at the same time, this nation-state adoption starting to move forward, MicroStrategy trying to buy more. The ETFs are buying more. And I think MicroStrategy alone has taken off two times, or maybe close to 3 times the amount of supply that will be mined in all of 2025. So Omega candles are coming. I just can't see it not happening. I just don't see us hovering at 80, 90, 100. I think we'll see a very violent move to the upside, and then suddenly retail is going to be interested, because now it's FOMO season, and retail seems to only really understand FOMO. We will see Omega candles, and my prediction is also we'll see 1 million in 2025. If not, then 2026. But it's coming very soon. It just has to do with all of the demand and not enough supply, and it hasn't reconciled yet. If it was going up gradually, then you can kind of visualize that the steam is being let out of the pot. It's kind of depressurizing a bit, but we're not seeing that. We're kind of hovering around at 84, accumulations at 84-ish. It doesn't seem to compute. And when things don't compute, then they reconcile very quickly. So it is that gradually, then suddenly. So maybe it's end of the year. I don't know, but it's going to reconcile, and it's going to reconcile in a very violent way.
The mining landscape is also undergoing a transformation. Mow highlights how public Bitcoin miners no longer need to sell their holdings to cover operational costs. Unlike a decade ago, miners now have financial instruments at their disposal, allowing them to borrow against their Bitcoin holdings instead of selling. This reduces sell pressure and further constricts supply. Additionally, nation-state mining is becoming more prominent. Governments with access to cheap or excess electricity are increasingly viewing Bitcoin mining as a strategic advantage. Unlike traditional mining companies, state-backed operations are not necessarily driven by short-term profitability, but rather by long-term monetary sovereignty.
Well, I guess it just takes time for people to figure things out. I wrote an article on Twitter, or on X, about this, and it's like people were kind of expecting the executive order calling for the creation of the SPR, or creating the SPR, would kind of kick things off right away. But I think your average man on the street doesn't have any idea what's going on. They're not following the developments. They're not following the news. They're not aware of anything. I think fund managers are probably more aware, but it takes time for them to also move and get things going, and to set up the processes that allow them to buy. And that's why I think ETFs, MicroStrategy, and MicroStrategy derivatives are sort of a shortcut path to that. And that can allow people to get in much faster. But in general, it takes a lot of time to gear up and pass the laws that are needed to start the whole process. And unfortunately, most of the world is waiting for things to signify that it is time, or actually a better way to say it, to signify it's too late, because that's the point at which there is no career risk. And I think Harry was mentioning something like that, right? Like there is this concept of career risk, which is if you do something with Bitcoin, then you're at risk. But the inverse is starting to become the new norm, which is if you don't do something with Bitcoin, your career is at risk. But yeah, it takes them a lot of time to kind of get there, and I think it's just a slow process. And the real price of Bitcoin is probably something like 200,000 right now, but we're not even there yet. And I believe it's just a matter of people reconciling that the reality of what's happening with the actual price. And usually that happens in a very violent manner when there's such a big disconnect. But right now you see like a lot of analysts, and they're all kind of mid-curve. It's always like this. Like when things happen in a certain way, they kind of say it's going to keep happening in this way. So like when we dipped to 70 something, I saw a lot of people saying, okay, we're going to go to 50. So we just had a big drawdown of 30 some odd percent or 30%. And now your mid-curve take is we're going to go lower, right? Because you're fearful and you can't see anything past your own fear. And right now we're kind of like in this period of consolidation crab market. And I saw some new mid-curve takes, which is we'll have 8 to 12 months of more sideways chop. I mean, that's just not reading the macroeconomic trends or reading anything. That's just your own personal bias and fear speaking. Well, the mining aspect is pretty bullish right now. I mean, you're seeing this trend of mining companies, especially public ones, that just never need to sell anymore. They can borrow. And that changes the dynamic greatly. I mean, yes, there is concern about centralization of hash rate in the country, but you know, the benefit of that is that you have a lot of US public company miners that just don't need to sell anymore. And that changes that entire calculus of mining profitability, right? Does it really matter how profitable you are? To a certain extent, but it doesn't matter as much as it did, let's say, I don't know, 10 years ago, when miners are trying to just eke by. But now they have all these different instruments at their disposal, and it kind of reduces the supply of Bitcoin. And you compound that with nation states mining too. And you know, for a lot of them, they're behind the meter. They don't really care about the cost of electricity, or they're just using excess electricity. So the entire game is just completely different now. And that's why I'm bullish on mining. We were engaged with the Central Bank of Suriname, and our proposal was just a very conservative 1% allocation. And we talked to them for months. We went there to meet with them in person. And then a week later, the World Bank went to visit, and then they just stopped talking. So you do see covert pressure being exerted. I'm not sure if you remember, but shortly after El Salvador made Bitcoin legal tender, Honduras, the central bank, kind of randomly put out a notice saying, yeah, we're never going to do anything like that. And we had heard some rumblings that there were some people visiting at that time to exert pressure too. So there's a lot of this covert operations going on to suppress Bitcoin adoption in these countries that do have loans, and these organizations that exist to provide the loans engage with. So, you know, if your job is to loan out money and keep countries in debt, then I think your incentive is to prevent them from ever getting out of debt. So the answer is yes.
Despite the clear economic incentives, Mow acknowledges that global financial institutions are actively working to suppress Bitcoin adoption, especially in debt-ridden countries. He shares an anecdote about Jan 3's engagement with the Central Bank of Suriname. After months of discussions about a modest 1% Bitcoin allocation, the World Bank visited the country, and suddenly, communication ceased. This is not an isolated incident. Mow believes financial institutions are pressuring developing nations to avoid Bitcoin in order to maintain control over their debt obligations. He also points to Honduras, which issued a public statement rejecting Bitcoin adoption shortly after El Salvador's move. Mow suggests that this was likely due to external pressure from global financial organizations. Please like and subscribe.